Okay, so let's get into it. I'm going to give you a little introduction because we are recording. Just
Yeah,
let you
sure.
know. So I'm with James Jones. James is a first-time author. This is your first book, right?
Yes, first book. Yeah.
And I got to tell you, it's the piece you got me reading is fantastic. Is
Thanks.
really, really, really good. I typically would never like subject a first-time author to a podcast episode, but yours was so great. I was like, there's no reason not to.
I appreciate that.
So yeah, so I love it. Yeah, so you're working on your first book. You sent it to me back in November, or was it October?
It was.
Oh, I think I froze.
It might have been. It might have been
There we
October.
go.
Maybe towards the end of October. Maybe.
Yeah, I think it was the end of October.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we read it together, and the
Mhm.
dialogue was great. But it had some theme problems. There were too many themes interacting at one time, and it
Yeah.
just needed some flow things. Like there's some plot flow issues going on. So you took it back and you reworked it, and we were supposed to look at it in 2 weeks, and then
Yeah.
I had a lot of life things happening. I disappeared for 2 months.
No,
And
it's
then,
no. Trust me, it's totally fine. By that time, we were. By that time, we were Facebook friends.
that's right. By that time
I
yeah,
could stalk you. I could stalk you, and I could
that's
see you
right.
had a lot going on. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
if you really, I mean,
I like,
we're just chatting now, but if you really want to know what was going on, I radically changed my diet, and my like health routines.
yeah.
And it caused me to sleep a ton more since college. For like the last 20 years, I've only slept like 4 to 5 hours a night.
That
Um,
yeah. I know what
and
that's.
I
Yeah.
was fueling that, I realized, by eating a second dinner at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
So I got up to like 265 pounds in December, and I was like, I like my blood pressure is off the
Yeah.
charts,
How
and I was
tall
like
are you?
6 foot.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I was like, man, I got to come down. So I made some radical changes in January, but the weird byproduct was I'm sleeping like 7 to 8 hours a night now. Like I
That's good.
can't stay up anymore.
Yeah.
So it's good. But the problem was I did all my writing work and all my like writing communication and everything from like 10 to 1 o'clock PM
Yeah.
while I was like eating chips. Like I was like fueling. So I've had to like restructure, but that's not an excuse. That's just to explain like that's where I went.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would like get up and be like, oh, I got to email all these people back. I'll do it tomorrow. I just got to go to sleep. And then like a month disappeared, and I was like, okay, I need to like get my crap back together now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm back on the ball. But yeah,
Oh,
anyway,
good. So what are you down to? What's your weight now?
I'm down to 240 now. I've lost
Oh,
25
nice.
pounds.
Good. Good.
I need to
Congrats.
lose another 40. So
Yeah.
yeah, but it's weird. I haven't been in high school. I played football and I was 230 in high school. Um, So right before I got married, I got down to 190, and I think that's the lowest I've been since like junior high. Uh, so I'm going to try to get back there again.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that
Well,
has nothing to do with the piece. So you took your piece, you re-edited it, and then dude, you fixed everything. Like you fixed it all. I'm going to share it here for a second. The theme is like the flow is great. It's
well, I
got
had some great coaching. I had some really good
well,
coaching.
thanks.
Yeah.
The flow is great. It's got um, a really strong emotional flow to it. Like the emotional flow is really good. And so now that we have kind of like the plot of the scene together, we can really dig into the dialogue, which I'm
Okay.
excited about.
Yeah.
Um, Something else I love about what you're doing is this is a dialogue driven piece, which
Hmm.
is, dude, I can't tell you how rare that is for a new author, right? Like I'm super impressed. Typically authors are plot driven, right? Like I know I was when I started writing, it
Yeah.
was all plot. You'd find huge chunks of prose in there, lots of telling and not showing, lots of like talking about emotion and not displaying emotion. Um, from the outset, your piece was dialogue driven, but now that the plot of the piece is worked out, now that there's like a clear beginning, middle, and end,
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
the end and the beginning match, that like the inciting incident you have happening at the beginning where the husband first gets mad at the wife about and like kind of comments on her spiritual life cynically, and how that resolves at the end. It's got a really nice flow now. So all that to say, like but it's all driven by dialogue, which is really great. Uh, it just makes for a really engaging, or super readable story. Um,
Yeah, thanks.
so yeah, and I hope you, if this doesn't become a book and you don't fill out the full book, I hope you start submitting this piece to places, because
Really?
it'll get published in a magazine or something. It's good enough to get that done.
Oh wow. Wow. Well, thanks. Wow.
You got to find the right one, right? Like submitting to magazines and stuff is difficult, because you got to
Yeah.
find, it's a lot of like figuring out what they want and then submitting what they want. So you'll have to find the right one. You need one that has like a very Christian theme to it.
Yeah.
Um, but the piece is good enough to be published, especially with a little bit more polish.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you may, but if you're holding it for a book, you may want to turn the full thing into a book, because the characters are engaging enough and interesting enough to drive that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I love about it. What I love about the piece. I've got 5 things that I want you to work on, and I'm kind
Yeah.
of going to structure. I left you a ton of notes um, in here, but there's kind of 5 main things that I want to talk about with you, because I think these are 5 things that you can kind of carry into the rest of your work.
Okay.
So I'm not going to hit all the notes. I'm just going to hit these 5 things.
Okay.
And then if you have any questions about any of the notes I left, we can come back and ask about them. We can come back and talk about those individual notes after. Are you cool with that?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Let's do it. Yeah.
Awesome. How do you, before I get into that, how do you feel about the piece after your first edit?
So I actually had to rewrite it a couple times, and that that the charts that you gave me, that you drew out,
Yeah.
the 5 different ones, and then you have my scatter plot. And so I think this is the 3rd revision.
Okay.
And I was like, I kind of had a feeling. I'm like, I think it's good enough, but as a writer, you kind of want to inject more into it.
Yeah.
So I got to a point, I said, you know what, I'm just going to just give them this, and then we'll go from there.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of looking at, we had that what, like the start low. No, this was start high, go low, finish high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're talking about
Um,
that. I think I have a copy of it up actually.
yeah.
That emotional flow chart.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
where we've got, so on the vertical axis is the character's emotional state.
Yeah.
Intensity is at the high. And then usually like you either do like intensity to like calm in the middle to like vulnerability at the low, but
Yeah.
like we've got this vertical axis, and then across the bottom we do the chapter beats. And your original piece was like the scatter plot, where it's like
Yeah.
up and down, up and down, up and down, up
Yeah.
and down. And yeah, and it and the problem with that, just to refresh, mostly for me a little bit, so that I can get my head in the game, just to refresh, is that when you have that scatter plot, the reader doesn't know how you want them to feel.
Mhm.
The reader can't feel what's going on, so they just disengage, and they're just like, there's too much happening, and it's not a conscious disengagement. It's an unconscious disengagement. They like start to skim, because they're like, I'm not sure how to feel, and it makes me uncomfortable, so I'm just going to skim the crap out of this. But yeah. And so this one, you took, if I were to graph this out, you start kind of neutral here, where he's coming home, he's playing with the baby, everything's fine. And then you go high intensity, and you have a really great build to a moment of anger with your main character. And then you bring it down into what I would say vulnerability, which is nice. And so if we actually wanted to rate this, I'm going to flip this chart. Let's say the top of the chart is great emotion. Like, let's say the top of the chart is vulnerability,
Okay.
where the couple is ending together in vulnerability. And the bottom of the chart is like the intense arguing and fighting. And so you start in the middle and you go low, and you have a really nice dip into this intensity. and then you slowly bring it back up, and you have a really nice incline to vulnerability. And then you have, and actually, you kind of end their conversation ends here in the kind of like calm and neutral, and
Mhm.
then you have this look kind of fifth act at the
Nice
end.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, this fifth scene that just rockets it up real fast. And it's a really nice, all that to say, the emotional flow of the piece is really nice now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you feel good about it now?
I do, and even after reading through your notes a couple times, I kind of understood. I mean, actually, it kind of clicked for me. And I'll tell you, as far as like the writing for me, it's almost like a movie that plays in my head.
Yeah.
So like kind of like rewind it, cut act two, go forward,
Hmm.
and it just I don't know if that sounds kind of weird, but it's almost
No.
like I see it,
Yeah, and you need
happening.
to, because we are writing for a visual and auditory culture, right? Like we write for readers, but those readers watch more TV than they read, and they
Mm,
listen to more than they read. So we need to have that in mind. In my opinion, is we need to have that in mind. And
yeah,
so yeah, being able to visualize your story, um, I think is really important. I think one of the best compliments a reader can give uh, our work now is like, man, I felt like I was watching a movie, right? Because that's what we want.
yeah,
We want them to
yeah,
feel that way. We
yeah.
want them to get that, like, yeah, I felt like this was, spot on.
Good, good.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into the 5 things I want you to work on. And again,
Okay,
these are like, oh, I want you to carry these through all your other pieces.
okay,
And I also plan to see more work in the future, by the way. Just telling
absolutely,
you. I promise not
absolutely.
to disappear for 2 months again. Okay, so I can't actually make that promise. So let's talk about the first thing I want you to think about is the cadence of your sentences. So, and what I mean the cadence of your sentences, um, dialogue is a lot like a song, right? Like there's beats to it, and
Mhm.
there's a rhythm to it, and there's a cadence to it. And we can feel when that cadence is out of sync, when when the song just doesn't sing, right?
Yeah,
Um, so this line here is a great, you have a couple of these moments in here where 90% of the time your dialogue's fantastically realistic and feels like something someone would say and has a really nice flow to it, right? Like, and that's a good cadence. When and cadence is all like, this isn't scientific. This is all about like heart and like feeling it.
yeah,
um so this, but you have a couple sentences that feel out of whack. So this is one of them, right? Like they're in the middle of, the wife is asking about who took his promotion.
hmm,
Cass, the wife is asking about who took John's promotion. So Cass says, hold on, you mean the same Dan that tied his tie around his head, gave that heifer a piggyback ride on the dance floor as she yelled, "Giddy up, Dan, Dan." That's a great line, right? Like you can kind of like flow with that line. It feels real, feels like something she'd say. It's in line with her voice, right? Like it sounds like Cass, which
yeah,
is good. Then you add here, yes, 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 and yes. Damn. Uh you said, sorry, I've deleted some of it. Uh the Dan that got that job. Or
yeah,
I'm sorry, the Dan, the same asshole Dan you're talking about got the job. That's what it was.
yeah,
It was yes, 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 and yes, damn, the same asshole Dan that you're talking about got that job.
yeah,
And it just felt out of sync with her, right? Because she's talking in these like, she tends to flow in these like complex beats.
mhm,
But John tends to flow in these kind of staccato responses, right? And now here in this line, he actually sounds more like her. So we want to keep that
yeah,
staccato of his, right? Like, yes, 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 and yes, damn. That's great. That sounds like John. That Dan, that's the guy that got the job, right? Like short, quick sentences, popping it off. And now we have that nice kind of dance between them where she has these kind of long stretched out lines and he has this like staccato repetition, and it makes for a really great harmony between the two of them. So there's another instance of this that I picked out that I thought was a good example of it, just to like give you another sign of it, is at the bottom of middle of page 5. um, he says he has this moment. They're in this dip of vulnerability where they're like, or if we're doing the upswing as the positive, they're like slowly swinging back up to vulnerability. And he's going to have this moment of vulnerability where he actually reveals what's like driving all of the anger inside of him,
Hmm.
which is this really kind of nice moment. And you had him asking the question. It says, Cass wasn't going to let this conversation die, so he decided to fall on his sword. Does God really exist? Is his question, which isn't a bad, like, it's a nice question. It's what's going on in his heart, but it feels too academic and theological
Hmm.
for this very intimate conversation between a couple,
Yeah.
right? And it's just this straight question as opposed to his normal like staccato kind of ramp up to things and then like dropping this bomb. And it's not personal, right? Like they're having this intimate conversation in their apartment, and all of a sudden he's removing the conversation from himself to talk about this philosophical thing. So like we want to keep it personal to him. We want to keep that like staccatoed beat to his voice. So like I don't know if I even believe anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and we get that same thing out of him
But it
without that
feels a
like,
lot better. Yeah.
yeah, without that kind of like realistic without that like removal of the words from himself.
Yeah.
um so that would be the first thing I would encourage you. Like, again, 90% of your dialogue feels super realistic and very to character voice. But you have these moments where you break it. And when you break it, I could feel it. So like, and I don't want to feel it, right? Because it
Yeah.
distracts from the story. And the way that I catch this in my own work is I'll read through it out loud, especially like an intimate and dramatic conversation like this.
Mhm.
I'll read through it out loud to myself. I won't read any of the prose. I'll just read the dialogue.
Mm.
Right. Like, so I don't read like Cass tilted her head to examine him. I just read the like, you just what? And then
Yeah.
I'll skip that whole paragraph and I'll just read like, I just, I don't know if I believe anymore. Right. Like, so getting that, like just reading the dialogue like it's a movie in your head, like it's a
That's
conversation.
good. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. You'll find these places where you've drifted from voice.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll even come through if it's hard to read because it's a lot of back and forth and a lot of like structured things.
Mhm.
Something I'll do is I'll assign both characters a color. And I'll just come through
Good
and like,
also.
let's say Cass is yellow. I'll just come through and highlight all of her words yellow.
Yeah.
And then I'll come through and I'll highlight like all of John's words green. So they pop, right? So I can see them on the page.
Yeah.
Um, and then I'll just come through and read the two characters, or I'll read one character all the way through. Like if I sense that something is broken about a character's voice, like, oh, this character's voice isn't working, I'll highlight the character voices
Mhm.
and then I'll just read what one character says, right? To see how it feels.
Yeah.
So like right here, for example, in John's, if we wanted to sample John's voice, we have, I mean, kind of, but I don't know. It's God. I just, I, I just, I don't know if I believe anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so when we read his voice popped out, you can feel that like staccato struggling to get his thoughts out. Right. Like,
Yeah.
especially this moment of vulnerability. So,
Mhm.
because this is the other thing I like about what you did, whether it was intentional or accidental, I don't know. We're going to claim it's intentional and give you props for it. What I like, it may just be your gut instinct though, but what
Yeah.
I like, which is a great instinct to have, lean into it. Uh, John's voice changes from anger to intimacy to kind of masking calmness. So in the opening of the piece, John's doing this baby talk, which
Right.
is
Right.
so fantastic, right? Because he's mad at his wife, misplaced anger, but he's mad at his wife, and he's only talking to the baby.
It's like ignoring her.
Yeah, totally ignoring her, but he's
Yeah.
trying to play it off like it's a happy thing.
Yeah.
But he's
Yeah.
ignoring her, only
Yeah.
talking to the baby. And it's so great, right? Like the baby talk is fantastic. I'm looking for it and I'm not finding it with my eye.
Right where the first pink line is.
Yeah, there he is.
Yeah.
Is that so? She says, "Babe, be careful. She just finished the entire cup of milk." And he says, "Is that right? Did you just get done drinking that cup of milk? Huh? Did you? Did you?"
Yeah.
His wife walked towards them. "Hey, babe." She threw her arms around both of them. uh love you too, honey. And this love you too, honey is so great because it's so like, I told you, like I might add like an eye roll there because
Yeah.
it's so like still detached. Like the words are supposed to be intimate,
Yeah.
but there's a feeling of detachment. So you've got this like playful John where he's trying to play things off, and then you modulate his voice when he's angry to be this like explosive John, right? Like so down here, um he threw his arms up in the air, and I'm sorry I didn't get the job. Apparently, I'm not good enough for anyone around here, you, God, or the firm,
Hmm.
right? Like, then this is such bullshit, right? Like, so we've got this like explosive John, which his thoughts seem to come a little quicker, but he's lashing out a lot.
Yeah.
But then when you get down here into vulnerable John, like we were just reading, vulnerable John really struggles with that emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got a really nice character voice here where he's okay if he's playing around. He's okay if he's angry. Like he can get
Mm.
words out and he can those are emotions he can deal with. But like the raw intimacy of vulnerability, he struggles with. And it's a really nice kind of almost macho man archetype there where like he struggles to reveal his own feelings, and with a pairing him with a partner like Cass, who has no problem speaking her mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Like it's a really great pairing. So all that to say, my recommendation is, after you finish a piece like this that's dialogue and that's intimate and that has these emotional
Mhm.
swings, take 10 minutes and just read their words, and you'll find these places that stick out where like suddenly John doesn't sound like John anymore, and you'll get a check because you have good instincts, so you'll get a check and you'll be like, oh, there's something there. You may not know what's wrong right away,
That's a good
but
tip.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, you'll just be like, oh, there's something there. And then you can come back and catch that again.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you can come back and edit and play with it a little bit. uh okay, any questions about that first one?
No, that's a lot of great information.
Okay,
That's what's really good. Yeah. Yeah.
very cool.
That's what I need there.
Okay, let's talk about building to intimacy. So, sorry, building to intensity and then slowing down to vulnerability. So, if we're looking at our chart again, there's two types of jumps you can have in your chart. So, let's say at the bottom of the chart is like um, anger slash terror slash fear, right? Like anything that's going to cause a visceral reaction in our voices change in character. I
Mhm.
change in voice. So if our character's terrified, they're going to scream, right? If our character's enraged, they're going to yell. And then at the top, we'll put kind of like normal state, meaning like wherever they, or we'll put original state, meaning like wherever they are, right? So if our character's relaxed or if our characters may be on edge a little bit, for John, we're talking about him trying to cover up his anger, right? And his hurt, really, his hurt and pain, he's trying to cover it. And he's going to move to anger. So we have to think about if our character's like hovering around here in that like just under their original voice, just
Mm.
under their original emotional level. So John's still like kind of holding it together. If we wanted to have a jump scare, right, where like suddenly somebody popped out of the closet with a machine gun, it's okay to move suddenly down to that like screaming terror,
Yeah.
right? Because the floor falls out. So if you think about his voice, the floor falls out of his voice and all of a sudden he's screaming. Um, what you have John doing in the scene is he walks into the kitchen and he starts like throwing things around, right? And like cusses for the first time in the scene. And that cussing is an indication that things are going bad. So you do want that like drop, right? Like you want the floor to fall out, but it's not like a jump scare, right? Like we don't want him to suddenly fall out. We want to show the reader I'm heading down a little bit, and then you want the floor to fall out,
Okay.
right? Like again, you don't want a slow decline. You don't want like John, like, okay, I'm getting angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier. We do want it to be a surprise because we want it to be shocking. And what we're trying to communicate to the reader with this kind of like floor falling out of the voice is that he's had this inside of him and he's been
It's
masking it.
building up. Yes, I'm building up. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
now he's just gonna let it all out.
Yeah.
But even when we have those explosive moments, there's usually a tilt down, right? Like it's like going down a roller coaster ride. You don't just boom, you tend to like go and then hang over the edge a little bit,
Mhm.
and then you go down. Then we're down the hill. And it builds this really great kind of anticipation for the reader of like, oh crap, things are about to go bad.
Yeah.
So here, I just want you to add like one or two more lines in here
Okay.
between him and her where and I want him to say something that's a little nasty, that bites, and I want her to be surprised. So he threw his arms up in the air and I'm sorry I didn't get the job. Apparently, I'm not good enough for anyone here, you, God, or the firm. We need to give her a response,
Hmm.
right? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. I was
And
just
then
thinking.
we
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we need him to like punch at her. And says like, well, may or we need her to punch at him, right? Like, or he can say like me God of the firm. And then have her saying something like, well, maybe if we were both praying, right? Like
Yeah.
questioning him,
Yeah.
and then he can explode.
Yeah.
Right? Like because when she says that, the reader like tilts over the edge of that roller coaster and it's like, oh no! Like now we can go down the hill.
Yeah.
But we want that like to build a little bit, or you can give it to him if you want to keep her completely innocent. She
Mhm.
can be like, what are you talking about? And he can be like, I know that this is just a disappointment to you. And that's the reader being like, ah, and she's like, you need to stop, and then he can explode, right? Like, but let's have that like little moment over the edge
Yeah.
to like build that anticipation.
Okay.
The other place I saw it in the reverse. So if that's how we want to build like anger and anticipation, or like the floor falling out, if we're gonna go in the reverse and we're gonna do um let's say they're in a state of anger. Let's say the floor has fallen out, right? We're here in the original, and then the floor falls out and we're down here. If we want to build back to intimacy, right? Where we're building back, when we get up here into this intimacy level, moving back up into like vulnerability and intimacy, we want to slow everything down. So heightened intensity, that heightened emotion, that's like fast paced, right? Like we want heightened emotion to be action packed and
Mhm.
fast. That like, my friend slash partner in this, Laura, she and I were doing a video for a class a couple days ago, and she talked about intense scenes like a ping pong match. Like a professional ping pong match where they're just like Forrest Gump style, like da da da
Yeah.
back and forth with the ball. And that's how we want that like intensity to feel. But when we get into these intimate and vulnerable moments, we want it to feel more like golf or baseball, right? Like where they're being strategic with their words and they're letting themselves feel things,
Mhm.
and everything gets slow. So it's okay in these moments of slowness to waste some lines, right? To just throw some things away. Um, so like slowing him down, where did I start slowing him down? Uh, well, yeah, up here, right on the top, on the bottom of page 4. Um, yeah, this is where I started slowing him down. So everything's running together. My first dad, my job, the baby, the move. I'm home all day, and to be for you, and for you to be. And then John says selfish.
Yeah.
I was going to say asshole, but I can add that a selfish asshole. It's not fair to you. No, it's not. And put that period in there.
Mhm.
I'm sorry. Right? Like slowing his voice down like that. Why, John? And then like just giving him another, like, what do you mean? Right? Like instead of giving her the whole line, giving him like a what do you mean? Then
Yeah.
having her say, like, what is it? Is it me? Have I, because I haven't showered, because I wear baggy sweatpants? Am I not pretty enough? And I might even slow that down. Like, what is it? Is it me because I haven't showered, because I wear baggy sweatpants? I don't know what you're talking about. Is it that I'm not pretty enough?
Yeah.
No, it's not any of, it's Cassandra. She did like, so in those moments of intimacy and vulnerability, we just want to slow everything down and like let the reader like feel the weight of what's happening.
Yeah.
Right. So think, if you think about it as sports, think of like the action scenes as like ping pong, where they're like slamming the ball back and forth
Mhm.
really fast. So just a couple beats per sentence, like throwing that thing back and forth. And then think about the intimate slow scenes like baseball, right? Like you're playing outfield in the baseball, and there's a lot of just watching the pitcher wind up. He's going to throw like 4 or 5 pitches before anybody hits anything, and even if they hit something, it may not come to you, right? Like, so it's just a much
Right.
like slower game, right? Like, so you want to like think about the emotional tone you're trying to create, and then take those amazing instincts of yours and use those to like let the reader feel it
Yeah.
and let
Even
that
as you're
like land.
describing it, like I mean, like I wrote it and I've read it, but even as you're describing it, like it feels like it's a roller coaster.
Hmm.
And kind of like when you're going, you get to the bottom of the hill, you kind of take that, it's like smooth and flat. You take that turn before
Yeah.
you go back up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's actually it's clicking now. So yeah.
Good. That's great. Yeah, and that's a great illustration. And this is the kind of scene. Now, not every scene can be this emotional. If
Right.
every scene in your book is this emotional, the reader's going to be exhausted. They're like, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. Right? Like, and at the end of this scene, we want John and Cass to like be out of steam.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of where this is. Like, this is like a let's collapse in the bed at the end of this scene.
Yeah.
Because they get to like the heat of fighting, and then they get back to like the peak of intimacy, and
Mhm.
like they've expended all emotional energy.
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, if you're like me and you process things through food, going back to our earlier, I'm like, let's go eat something. I need to recharge calories. Like, and that's kind of where they are, right? Like they're in this
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, need to kind of recharge a little bit. Um, okay, so any questions about building intimacy and like
Mm.
intensity?
No, no, I got it. I got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, just for like practicality, I typically don't get this on my first draft. This is my processing for a second draft, right? Like, so I'll write a scene out just like you did the first time, just get it out, like vomit the whole thing out, get where you want to go. But then when I come back to it a second time, that's when I'm like, what do I want my reader to feel? What do I want my characters to feel? Am I
Mhm.
in the intimacy? Am I slowing my dialogue down enough? In the intensity, is my dialogue fast enough? right? Like, is it quippy enough? Is it moving enough? Because that speed of dialogue will increase the intensity, whereas in the intimacy and the vulnerability, that slowing down will increase the weight of the moment.
Mm.
So just this is a second pass thing. This isn't a first pass. I've actually never met anybody that can do it on the first pass. I'm sure they're out there in the world,
Yeah.
but like a lot of times I'll get close, and I know I'm close on the first pass when I'm feeling it as I'm writing. Like
Mm.
there's times where I'm writing something and I'm like tearing up a little bit, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is that like
Yeah.
heavy
Yeah.
weightedness, and I need to slow down.
Yeah.
But I usually don't hit it right until the second or third pass. And so this is an editing thing less than it is like a first draft thing. Just so you know, practicality. Um, okay, next thing, talking about sports. Uh, I want you to start thinking about your dialogue as a tennis match. You ever watch tennis?
Yeah, that's a good analogy. When I read that on the comments there, I like that. It's a good analogy. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Um, your characters need to be hitting that ball back and forth.
Mhm.
So somebody can't hit the ball twice.
Okay.
Like dialogue doesn't work that way. One
Yeah.
person hits the ball, the other person needs to return it. Right now, returning it doesn't need to be verbal. Right, like they can shift their weight, they can roll their eyes, they can sigh, they can, but we need a response, right? Like because that dialogue, this Harvard professor I really like, Allison Woods Brooks, has a great quote in a paper that every human interaction can be boiled down to a series of conversations, right?
Mm.
Like, and that's when we're writing dialogue, it's not about like what dialogue does is it communicates to the reader who the characters are. So we need to experience both characters, right? Like we don't want to short shrift any of them.
Yeah.
So when you're writing it, think about it that way, right? Like I'm hitting the ball, Cass hits the ball, John has to return it. You can't skip his return.
Okay.
Cass has to hit it back. Now that return can be nonverbal. That return again, like that return can even be silence, but the
Mhm.
reader needs to see it, right? Like so. Um, here I want you to say you had lines like John would respond and then Cass would speak on the same line. So one way we can communicate this tennis match is just purely through our spacing, right? Like and just like giving John's physical reaction its own line and its own space. So I'm in the house all day except to go to the freaking grocery store. I miss law negotiating and research and the investigating. So this is that great like Cass run-on sentence voice. Um, you know, you know what I research now? Ingredients. Red 40s, yellow fives, and blue whatever. Like I'm the damn Lucky Charms leprechaun. Fantastic line. And you know what I negotiate? Huh, John? Huh? John dropped his head. Originally, you had John dropped his head on the same line,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Put
Okay.
it down so
Yeah.
that we can see that this is John's reply, right?
Yeah.
Like John dropped his head.
Yeah.
Coupons. So we could eat healthy, and then you can come home and act like this. Cass, look, I appreciate every so like that's like we want to like use your spacing. And there's 3 or 4 times I caught it in the piece where
Mhm.
you're like putting John's response in the middle of Cass's rant, but use that spacing in order to communicate that tennis match.
Okay. Okay.
There's another instance at the bottom where John didn't even reply, right? Like you have a Cass thing, and then Cass thinks about how John is thinking, and then you have another Cass line, and we want to make sure we always give that like back and forth reply,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
um and it'll help you, this will also help you with emotional flow of the piece, because you have to, when you think of it as a back and forth, you have to process how everybody feels. um and for future scenes, right, because not all scenes are going to be two people,
Mhm.
some scenes are going to be three, some scenes are going to be four.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, for those big cast, I call them big cast scenes, three or more people,
Mhm.
be aware of everybody in the room.
Okay.
Everybody needs a reply. So sometimes people can reply
I
in,
actually have one like that, which is one of the ones I want to send you. So it's like, yeah, it's they're at a bus stop.
yeah, I want
Yeah.
to see it, right?
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah.
everybody needs a reply, right? Like, so, and people in a big cast scene can reply in mass, right? Like, so if you're at a bus stop and you're like, John and Cass are talking and there's two people standing around them, the two
Yeah.
people standing around them can be like the Greek writers used to have a chorus, right? Like, so Greek writers in their plays used to have like the chorus that like sang in unison to the character, and it would be
Mhm.
like, the Bible does this too in the Gospel of John, because the Gospel of John's written kind of like a Greek tragedy. So you have Jesus speaking to the crowd, and then
Yeah.
the crowd replying. So Jesus will be like, you know, if you want to follow me, you have to, eat my flesh and drink my blood. And the crowd, yeah,
Yeah.
the crowd
Yeah.
responds, "This doesn't make any sense. Can you just give us more fish?" Right? Like,
Yeah.
so, but the crowd speaks. You can do that in your pieces too, where like you speak as the crowd. So, like, the people at the bus stop all look away uncomfortably at their phones till I listen to John and Cass talk, right? Like, but we need to hear how everybody in the
Yeah.
scene's responding.
I'm actually excited to go back and edit that one because it's a lot going on. There's like there's an IT guy, there's a girl with OCD,
Nice.
there's like a country kind of guy that has a country accent that has that spit and dip in his cup.
Nice.
And,
That's
and
awesome.
then you have Michael, the angel Michael, having a conversation with Grace.
Awesome. Yeah.
So it's actually a yeah. So
That's
I'm
a
actually
complex scene, and that's fun.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, if you can pull off big cast scenes, they're huge home runs. They're really hard. I'm convinced that like the reason people believe Ernest Hemingway is such a great writer is because he can crush a big cast scene.
mm,
He nails it. And like, it's yeah, if you can pull it off, they're so fun. And this is where like writers tend as us as writers tend to be at a disadvantage to the movies, because the movies can pull off a big cast scene because they have everybody's autonomous and they're
yeah,
all on the screen, and they can each direct themselves. As the writer, we have to get behind everybody's eyes and get everybody moving, right? Like,
yeah,
so, but it is like keeping everybody engaged. You never want to forget that somebody's in a big cast scene, right? Like, you always want to remember, like, oh yeah, there are other people standing at the bus stop. What are they doing? And they
yeah,
can respond as a crowd, or they can respond individually. Like the man to Cass left's left side, Cass give him a side eye.
yeah.
Like, so, like, have them
Okay,
interplay with that. Yeah,
okay, yeah, yeah. Good, good.
yeah. Okay, so we talked about cadence. We talked about building to intensity and slowing down to intimacy. We talked about this is just me because I have to read. My handwriting's so bad. I actually have to reread my notes in order to. We talked about the tennis match. Okay.
Yeah,
Um.
number four.
Yeah. The rule of three. And then um, interrupting with movement. So this is a technical thing, and this is like less about feeling, less about how things. How characters speak, and this is more about the technical aspect of writing.
Okay.
And I neglected to write down where I put this on the page, so now I have to find it. So I'm just going to babble here for a second while I find it on the page. um, so the first thing is the rule of three. You do this naturally a lot, which is great. There was one place where I caught you not doing it. Here we go. So this is Cass again ranting, right? She says, originally you had, I'm suffering too. Being a stay-at-home mom uh, is a joy, and I love it. I love being with our child, but it sometimes sucks. Cassandra is 8 months old and runs the day. Look at me. Look at what I'm wearing. Look at my hair. I haven't showered. I don't have adult conversations. I haven't even, she shifted the baby onto her hip and pushed from her face. I haven't even brushed my teeth yet.
Hmm.
She pointed to the French press for coffee. So she starts in this I haven't rant. And we naturally speak in threes, right? Like, and you have it here earlier, right? Like, being a stay-at-home mom is a joy. I love being with our child, but sometimes it sucks, right? Look at me, look at what I'm wearing, look at my hair, right? It feels very complete. There's
Yeah.
something very weird in us as people that like we like things in threes. We just do. And so we talk in threes. A lot of times we think in threes. And this is like a great example of the rule of three, right? Like look at me, look at my hair. Now you can take a breath.
Mhm.
I haven't now we're starting another three. I haven't. And you have them. I haven't showered. I don't have any exalt conversations. I haven't even brushed my teeth.
Mhm.
But you're breaking up the three with this physical movement, which is something you do a lot in the text. You break up what Cass is saying with some kind of physical movement in the middle of her paragraph. Give us all of her dialogue and then put the physical movement at the end, or put the physical movement at the beginning and then
Mhm.
let her rant. But breaking up the thought like that stops, for here, for instance, it stopped the rule of three and it made me go like, ugh, like, wait, what just happened? That
Yeah.
feels weird.
Yeah.
So let all of her stuff come in one space, right?
Okay.
Like don't don't interrupt her with these physical movements.
Okay.
You'll really see this if you go through on your second pass and you highlight all the voices in a certain color.
See it. Yeah.
You'll really start to see this,
Okay.
right? So what I changed it to, first, I edited some of this out because she's ranting and you don't need all these details,
Okay.
right? Like, so we can just move some of these details out. Part of that just comes from like being able to read it out loud. But, and this, like, I'm suffering too, okay, is her responding directly to them, right?
Mm.
Like, no, listen, no, you listen. She dropped the diaper bag and threw her keys at John. He caught them. I'm suffering too, okay? Right? Like, getting her like speaking instead of just I'm suffering too, getting her speaking directly to him. I'm
Mhm.
suffering too, okay? Being a stay-at-home mom, and then just let that trail off. She doesn't need this as a joy, and I love it because um, she says it here. I love being with our child,
Yeah.
but it sucks sometimes.
Yeah.
We don't need to know why it sucks, right? Everybody knows why being a stay-at-home mom sucks. You don't need to tell them. Look at me. And then she tells us here, look at me, look at what I'm wearing, look at my hair. I haven't showered. I don't get any adults conversations. I haven't even made my coffee yet. Right.
Mhm.
Like, so get that rule of three in there. Then tell us she shifted the baby to her other hip and pushed the tears from her face. And then let him say, Cass, I, right? Like, so put all that dialogue together so we can feel the rhythm, the cadence of that song. Let her finish her solo and
Yeah.
then get that physical stuff in there.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Last thing. Uh, letting your emotions speak, letting the words speak for themselves. Um, so here, and I do this too. I do it so much when I am um, in the middle of an intense moment and like an emotionally deep moment. I really want the reader to know what the characters are feeling. So I stop showing and I start telling.
Mm.
And that's what you're doing here,
Yeah.
right? Like he says, Cass, please, right? Like realizing that he's like stepped in crap and he's like trying to pull it back now.
Mhm.
And she says, no, I'm talking. She pointed at John and placed the other hand on her hip and leaned forward. This is a good place for an interruption of words because she finished her thought, right? No, I'm talking. Thoughts finished. Now I can have this. Now I can start my second thought. You had your chance to talk and now it's my turn. But I might put these together too, right? She pointed at John and placed her other hand on her hip and leaned forward. No, I'm talking. You had your chance to talk and now it's my turn, right? Let her get her whole song out. She
Yeah.
started to cry and lost her words. So what you originally had was John was also at a loss for words. With heavy eyebrows, he bit the inside of his cheek. You're telling me now. John was also at a loss for words. Don't tell me, just show me. With heavy eyebrows, he bit the inside of his cheek.
Mhm.
He's not talking. I know he lost his words, right? Like, so you don't have to tell me that.
Yeah.
After raising her head out of her hands, Cass dug her fingers into her chest. What did I just do? Or what did I do? What did I do to you? right? Like, again, like we have this emotional shift here where she's mad, then she starts to cry, and now she's coming up with these um, very painful, vulnerable words, which is great. This is like that big emotional shift. But then you wrote, he couldn't think of anything to make this right. Baby, you didn't do anything wrong. John had no idea how he was going to get himself out of this hole. You don't need to tell me. I know. Right? Like, just
Yeah,
let
yeah,
the dialogue talk. Right? Like,
yeah,
let the words do your work.
yeah,
Right? Like, so I don't need, he couldn't think of anything to make this right. Oh, I know he stepped in it back here when he said, Cass, please. Right?
yeah,
Like, I'm in it.
yeah.
So this just pulls me out of the intimacy, right? Like that inner thought you're giving him rips me out of the intimacy. And then I have to go back in to hear his voice and then I have to come back out, right? Like, so if we think of this as a stage play, we really just want to hear them talk and we want to see their body language and we don't want anything else.
Okay.
Right. So, and if you're doing your job with the dialogue, then we don't need the other stuff. Right. Like if you're actually coming through on the dialogue, we don't need these extra inner thoughts. So reading it without that inner thought, we get this Cass, please. No, I'm talking. Or sorry, Cass, please. She pointed at John and placed her other hand on her hip and leaned forward. No, I'm talking. You had your chance and now it's my turn. She started to cry and lost her words. With heavy eyebrows, he bit the inside of his cheek. After raising her head out of her hands, Cass dug her finger into her chest. What did I do? What did I do to you? You you didn't do anything wrong.
Mhm.
Marcus hit me and I showed him grace because he was upset. Yeah, I know. Right? Like you could feel it now, right? Like
Mhm.
all of that stuff about how John's thinking on the inside is just a distraction.
Yeah.
And I, like I said, I do it too. And what it is, what I find it is in me is it's this need to pull out of the emotion because it hurts.
Yeah, even writing it, like you feel it.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
hurts, right? Like, and you can feel what your characters are feeling. You have that deep empathy.
yeah,
So pulling out of it and like, I want to pull away from it. I
yeah.
want to like pull myself out of it. So I'm going to write how the character's feeling,
Mhm.
but don't do that, right? Like, because the great moments come when we're like pressed in. If you want to read somebody who's a master of this, it's Toni Morrison.
Okay.
Toni Morrison, man, does this better than anybody I've ever read. She just lets things, especially in Beloved, um, she just lets these words between Sethi and Paul just hang there. And they're so painful.
Mm.
And they just like, you just have to sit with it. And it just hurts, which
Yeah.
is her intention, right? Like, 'cause she's communicating the horrors of slavery. So it's like this, like these two characters talking about how they talking to each other, sometimes miscommunicating, talking about like next steps and where they need to go, or like reminiscing about their past.
Mhm.
Um, we don't have things like, and Paul D thought about how hard it was back where they had come from, right? Like we just have him saying like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And it's just this like, oh, like just the way the anvil falls on the emotional anvil, just like crushes you, just like, hurts. So, but yeah, if you're gonna go into drama like this and write scenes like this, trust your words,
Okay.
trust them to do your talking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah.
All right, man. That was all I had. Did you have questions about anything you want to dig into?
No, the only question I had, which you've actually answered that in all your comments, was I just wanted to. So my main thing, especially being a first time writer, and I mean you're really the first person I've had look at any of it, like in any
That
kind of
makes me super
detail
happy.
at
Thanks,
all.
Ben.
Yeah, no, thank you. So like the big thing I had was, is with writing this, the way that I see it and write it, can someone else read it and see the same thing? Like that was my main thing. And you kind of said that a little bit in our discussion.
Yeah. And that's the hardest for as a new writer. Um, that's one of the hardest things is trusting yourself
Yeah.
and like taking those risks, like taking those big swings and trusting that if it doesn't work, you're gonna find it in editing. Right, like those two, because the truth is, man, you're not gonna hit a home run every time. This piece is a home
Right.
run.
Yeah.
You're gonna write chapters that are absolute stinkers. They're gonna be the worst, and
Yeah.
you're not gonna see it, and somebody else is gonna need to read it and be like, "No, this is bad," and that's okay. That's all part of writing. Um, especially as I think the one thing I wish somebody had told me as a new writer is that like you can have all the best instincts in the world.
Mhm.
You can be the most natural writer on the face of the planet. But what makes a new writer a good writer is rigor and
Yeah.
practice
Yeah.
and repetition, right? Like it's like learning a sport. Like I don't know if you played sports. I played football and baseball and basketball growing
Definitely.
up.
Yeah.
And like playing football, I was an offensive lineman and we would work on our first step off the snap of the ball over and over again. And we just get in a 3-point stance, they'd snap the ball, and we'd practice stepping with a foot.
Mhm.
And then we'd get back, snap the ball, practice stepping with the right foot, get back, snap the ball, practice stepping. We'd do it 50 times until that like step with the right foot became just natural, something you do.
Yeah.
Or, oh man, learning how to swing a baseball bat, right? Like just working on like the twist of your hip.
Yeah, the hips. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can just
Yeah.
remember, especially when I was like going to college camps and stuff, learning to play,
Mhm.
just standing there, holding the bat and just getting that hip in like over and over again. Just until you feel it, just like a step in the hip, a step in the hip, a step in the hip. And that kind of rigor is what makes a great athlete, right? Like working on the details. And it's the same with writing. So like you've got a ton of natural instinct and you've got like really great, you're doing an amazing job of putting emotion on the page. But without the rigor, you're just going to be a really great pickup player,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
you'll be really great in the softball game. You'll show up and they'll be like, man, James is a natural athlete. Why didn't he ever do anything with that?
Yeah.
And so, like, you have to have the rigor to get to the next level. So, the adage is true, like, write every day.
Mhm.
And it doesn't even need to be a lot, right? Like, because, I'm very much like you. I have a full-time job. I got a wife and kids. An hour a night, just an hour a night, write 100 words,
Yeah.
right? Like just get them on the page. And that rigor of doing it every night, those 100 words will become 500. Those 500 will become 2,000. And after a year, you'll have a book.
Yeah.
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 And you just got to pound it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel no, this is good. I mean, I feel like because even with this book, what I say now is it's I mean, it's written. I mean, it had 50 something chapters. It's just
Nice.
going back and just editing for content and context, but I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing. So I mean, and it's a dialogue heavy book. I mean, you have
Yeah.
angels and demons, and they're talking to people, and people are talking to each other, and they're
Nice.
wrestling with their ideas and talking to themselves. I'm like, I just don't know like how to make this thing flow. But so no, this has been extremely helpful.
Good. Well, and when I turn off the recording here in a second, I'll give you some plot stuff.
Yeah.
Um, because the stuff I taught you will help make your scenes real, but
Mhm.
it's not going to help make your plot readable.
Mm.
So, and those are two different things, right? Like story structure and then scene structure are completely different. So, like what I'm helping you with is like characterization, making your characters sound real,
Yeah.
reader engagement, right? Like keeping your reader engaged, uh, communicating emotion. But those are all like scene level and story level things, but that's not going to help your plot. Plot is a different world, right? Like, so I think about it a lot as like dialogue and this stuff we're characterization, this stuff we're talking about. Those are the muscles on the body, but the plot is the skeleton. And you
Okay.
have to have both. You got to have a strong skeleton and a strong musculature in
Okay.
order to like make your book move how you want it to move. Yeah. All right. I'm going to stop the recording and then we can keep talking.
Okay.